If you're building your ABA company and you're tired of guessing, this is for you. We built the EBCBA blueprint to give you real structure, systems, and support without the fluff. Details are in the description.
Hey, everybody. So we are excited to have Didi from Premier Behavioral Health Consulting, and her specialty is credentialing. And as part of what we do on this group is making sure that you guys have plenty of DIY stuff that you can go in. You have tight budget. You got to do some of this stuff yourself. Some of us like to change our own oil and mow our own lawn. So some people just like to do it themselves. Bringing people on Didi really helps us to give us a professional insider's view of what happens there and some common mistakes that we've seen. We're here for you to grace us with your knowledge. So we're going to take us from square one to having all your credentials in place. Let's hear it.
Yeah. This is essentially an overview for people that want to do their own credentialing. You have a startup, you're tight, you don't have a lot of cash flow, so you just want to get something in so you can start billing and start getting some revenue for your company so you can make payroll and things like that. So it's essentially an overview. We're going to provide a checklist, and I'm happy to send you the slides so you can post it in the group. But essentially, it's going to be just an overview. These are all of the things you need to have the credentialing process set up for your startup. So we're going to go over an introduction, then the preparation for submitting for credentialing, the documents that are required, and then establishing a process. Even if it's just yourself in the startup, you're a solopreneur, you have to set up a process and make sure that you're checking all the boxes. Otherwise, your credentialing is going to get denied, and you're going to waste a lot of time and money trying to get that fixed. So the unfortunate reality is that we need insurance. I know it's the bane of everybody's existence, and every clinician I've ever talked to is like, man, I wish I could just do private pay, but private pay isn't accessible to most people. I don't think I've ever met a person, even if they're making a lot of money, that can private pay 30, 40 hours of ABA in a week. That is thousands of dollars a month, right? Obviously, going through insurance is going to improve the accessibility for the clients of your community, but it's also going to ensure consistent revenue, because you run the risk of trying to do only private pay. And then it's going to come time where the parent's going to say, I'm sorry, I can't keep paying these thousands of dollars in a month. And they're going to pull services, and then you've lost a lot, if not all of your revenue, right? So insurance is a necessary evil. Unfortunately, a lot of us don't enjoy it, but we got to go through it. So I think one of the most important parts to have successful credentialing is your preparation. So before you fill out your application, before you submit anything to insurance, making sure you go through and acquire all of the documentation, cross your T's, dot your I's, make sure you have everything already drafted and planned out. And we're going to go over some insurances require you to pretty much already be set up and be operational. They don't really account for the startup process. So there's standard documentation that every insurance is going to require. And then there are insurance specific types of documentation that you're going to need to provide. And that really comes down to the provider that you are working with. Even if it's Medicaid, Florida Medicaid is different than Texas Medicaid, is different than Arizona Medicaid. When you start drilling down and getting very specific, each insurance company is different. Even if it's the same, let's say, provider like Medicaid, California is different than New York, and so on and so forth. You really need to know what their process is, what they're requiring, and you have to follow up on it. So it's not just submitting the insurance application, waiting 60 days to get a denial letter or an approval letter. You really have to follow up, make connections, and we'll get into that too. So we're going to talk a little bit about things that you need to have, essentially a packet that you're going to submit to the provider for credentialing. And again, your best practice is going to be take that provider's manual, Optum, TRICARE, whomever it is you're trying to credential with, and go through that manual with a fine-tooth comb. There are a lot of things to be mindful of, like the settings that they will pay for you to provide services. That's something that can get you denied if you're trying to do all in schools, for example. So go in, read the manual. That's the hard part of DIY, right? You have to do it all yourself and it's all on you. So you got to go in there, you got to read the manual and make sure that this is something you actually want to pursue. So let's get into the documentation that you need. So the first thing you're going to need is a business license. And this is also very area specific. So to give you an example, I am in Tampa, Florida. I am in the county that's north of Tampa. If I were in the city of Tampa, I would need a business license from the city of Tampa. But because I am 5 minutes north of the Hillsborough County border and I'm in Pasco County, I need a business license from Pasco County. Even within the same state, different counties and different cities require different business licenses. Sometimes you need both. Sometimes you need the city and the county license. Sometimes there's a state license. So this is the hard part about credentialing. Everything is not only specific to the provider, but also specific to the area that you are working in or that you're living in. So I use myself an example. I was helping credential someone, again, in Hillsborough County, and they had a different business license. I showed them mine and they said, "What is that? That looks different." And it's because I live in the county that's just north. So another thing you're going to need, and this is usually a barrier if the person trying to do an ABA startup is not a BCBA, and that might be a little shocking to some, but I've worked with a lot of parents of children with autism that have not been satisfied with the services that they receive, and they've chosen to start their own companies. So there are people who are not clinical that are recruiting a BCBA to begin their ABA startup. Now, I say that's a barrier because you need that BCBA as a lead analyst on all your paperwork for your startup to be able to start credentialing with a lot of different providers. So if you are in the process of hiring someone, one of my clients is currently do that. We're doing the recruiting process. We're interviewing for a clinical director. He does not have a lead analyst to go into, I'll use Florida Medicaid as an example. We have to go into our portal, add that group number and say, I agree to be attached to this group and I agree to be a lead analyst for this group. And we have to screenshot that and we have to submit that to Medicaid. That process it takes a while. We all know hiring, recruiting takes a while. If everything goes smoothly, it's anywhere between 30 and 45 days. If you don't have a lot of applicants or you don't have a lot of quality applicants, that can be a lot longer, right? So keep that in mind when you're credentialing if you're not a clinician or if you're not a BCBA. Sometimes there are clinicians that want to start like a multidisciplinary team, and they might be a licensed clinical social worker or a nurse. So you need to have your lead analyst. You need a copy of their BCBA certification. Malpractice insurance or professional liability insurance. This is something that usually slows people down when they're doing credentialing. They have everything else. They go to submit and they're like, oh, I don't have liability insurance. I highly recommend that you get liability insurance regardless of credentialing. You need it as a business owner, especially add yourself, have professional liability insurance in any health service industry. You definitely need professional liability insurance. And you're going to have to submit that copy to the provider that you want to credential with. You need a tax ID number. Your TIN number, your EIN, they're interchangeable. So essentially, this is also a barrier for credentialing for a lot of people, more so for the clinicians. They're a BCBA, they're ready to get started. They're used to being attached to a group and then trying to get themselves credentialed. A lot of insurance companies operate in like a roster system. So you credential the group NPI, and then you add your BCBAs, RBTs, BCABAs underneath. And that varies by insurance, which is what makes credentialing so complicated, right? But you need to essentially incorporate as an LLC, as a sole proprietorship, an S corp, however it is that you want to structure your business. Very few of us are going to be like a C Corp or anything like that, unless you have investors and you're doing the private equity route. If that's the case, you probably don't need to watch this video, but you're going to need to have your tax ID, and you do that by creating some type of entity like an LLC and then getting your tax ID number from the IRS. You can typically do that as a bundle if you go through something like LegalZoom, or they have packages that they'll essentially get all the paperwork in and get you all the numbers that you need. If you are a clinician, chances are you have your individual national provider identification, so your individual NPI. If you're not a clinician and you're hiring a clinician, that person is most likely going to have their NPI if they're practicing in the field. If it is a brand new BCBA that just got certified, number one, I caution you to put that person as your lead analyst, but please do make sure that they have their NPI set up. And then part of the reason why you also want to have your LLC or your entity created is you need a group NPI. That's really easy. The same way you apply for an individual NPI, you fill out the name, address, a taxonomy, we're a behavior analyst, and they give you your group NPI. That takes, if it takes 24 hours, that's a lot. And they'll give you your NPI. And then from there, this is also a barrier. Some people think, I'm going to do in-home services, so I don't need a physical address for anything. For credentialing purpose, you do have to have a physical address, and that can be your home. That's fine. Some people have like a mail service, usually at UPS stores, you can get a mailbox or something like that if you don't want to put your home address on there. But whenever you do your credentialing, make sure you pick an address that you're going to receive whatever correspondence they send to you, because that's where they're going to send you and say, there's a deficiency in your application. You were denied, you were approved. Here is your provider number. All those things are going to go to whatever address and email you put on file. So please make sure that it's something that you can access regularly. So you're going to need your practice information. We talked about the address, phone number. That can be your cell phone number. You can get like a free Google Voice number. That's what I use. That's perfectly fine. Most insurances are going to require a fax number, mostly because some of them still require to fax in treatment plans or claims issues. It's more HIPAA compliant than email. You don't have to go out and buy a fax. You can have an email-based fax. Some of them are free. Some of them are very cheap if you're not going to be sending like a ton of pages. Some of them charge you per page. It's real easy to find like an email-based fax system, and you can just use that number for your application. If you want multiple locations, so let's say you're thinking, okay, thinking again of the Tampa area, right? I want a center in Hillsborough County. I want a center in Pasco. I want a center in Pinellas. That's what we call the tri-county area, right? I'm going to have an address at in each of those counties, and I'm going to add that to my credentialing application. You could go back and add an address. For example, if you start off with your corporate address, or if you start off in your home because you're going to do all in home or in school, you can start with that address and then go back and add if you have a new center or a new location that you're serving. It's just going to delay the process of getting that location up and running to be able to submit claims. If you have the capability of doing your credentialing all at once, please do. But I get it. You could be looking for real estate. Things are really expensive. Maybe you're not ready to like lease 3 centers, which is totally understandable. But if possible, try to get as many locations as possible. And to give you a better example, if you're not thinking about getting real estate for a center, I have a client in Monroe County, which is the Florida Keys, and she lives in the county north, Miami-Dade County. When she got her Medicaid provider number, she had to get a provider number from Monroe County and one from Miami-Dade County. So although she didn't have a physical center in each county, she has her home address for Miami-Dade, and then she has a center in Monroe County. So she put both places in to be able to bill out of both counties. So again, this gets really complex. So if you're trying to DIY, just make sure you have all your ducks in a row as far as documentation before you even submit. Your W-9 for the business, that's really important. You can find that form online. You can just download it in a PDF, fill it out, and then submit it to your credentialing application. Avoided check for electronic funds transfers. Now, this is going to have to be a business account because remember, you've created an entity. You're an LLC now. So you're going to have a business account that's separate from your personal account. We're getting away from credentialing, but something to keep in mind if you're going to be running your LLC, you're going to want to have your business account separate from your personal account. You're going to get a check and you're going to just write void on it and send it to them because now they have the routing number and they have the account number. So they're going to set that up to be able to do the electronic funds transfer once they start paying out claims. Any additional information that they may request. We mentioned Florida Medicaid requiring the screenshot of the lead analyst, adding the group to their personal Medicaid portal. That's something that we have to submit. There is a paper form, like an application, that sometimes owners need to sign. That's in addition. And again, this varies by insurance company. So read those manuals. Go in. We're going to talk about a couple of insurance companies that give you a checklist to go through, and I'm going to give you a tip on how to use that for other insurance companies as well. So now we're going to get to your application submission. Here, you want to customize each application to your credentialer. So you're going to personalize it, and you're going to really have a lot of detail in whatever it is that you submit. For example, in TRICARE, you're going to have clinicians that have CPR and BLS training, and you need to submit a copy of their CPR card, right? That's very specific to TRICARE. Medicaid doesn't usually require that. Optum may not require that. So know the ins and outs of that specific company's credentialing criteria and make sure to submit it all at once. Because what typically happens is you submit, let's say, 90% of the application. You submit it, you think you got it, it's beautiful. You're waiting 30 days, 60 days. You get an email that says, oh, you missed your CPR card. So you think it's a quick fix. Okay, I'm just going to send them over my CPR card. But usually they'll tell you, no, you have to reapply. And because you have to reapply, now you have to wait another 30, 60, 90 days to go through the whole process because you missed one CPR card. So I cannot stress enough to really have a lot of detail and have everything personalized to that provider that you are applying to. We talked about completeness with the example of missing the CPR card and that kind of setting you back a couple of months, but also accuracy. So obviously you are not going to submit like fake BCBA numbers and things like that. Obviously that's not going to work. You're going to get caught. You're not going to get credentialed. But it's something that happened to my client where she conducted the ACA background check for Florida Medicaid in her maiden name. She got married, changed her last name, and then the background check is in her maiden name, but all of her identification is in her married name. That caused a denial from Florida Medicaid. We actually had to submit her marriage license to prove that she is who she says she is, essentially. Something to keep in mind regarding accuracy and completeness. Some insurance providers, not all of them, but some of them, the bigger ones, have audits that they conduct prior to even credentialing you. So I know for those of us that are in the field, we know they're going to go in and they're going to audit our notes. They're going to audit our claims. They're going to make sure that we're not committing fraud and things of that nature. But a lot of people don't realize that insurances are actually going to audit you before they even give you a provider number. And this is also a barrier for people that are trying to DIY because you went through all the documentation we've already talked about. You got everything in order. And then you realize, oh, I need policies and procedures. I need templates of my notes. I need all of these things that I don't have as a startup. My trick, if you want to call it that, is find the most comprehensive application. Find the one that requires the most and use that as a template to prepare for every other insurance. So in most cases, that's going to be Optum and your state Medicaid. So Optum has on their Provider Express website, they have an internal audit, and they actually give you the form that the reviewer is going to use to audit you for credentialing. So they have, I believe it's an audit for the medical record and then an audit for the company overall. Go ahead and pull it off their website. It's free. You don't have to pay anybody. You don't have to do anything. Download that and use that as a template to make sure you have everything set up for your other insurances. Something that you have to do for Optum and at least Florida Medicaid, I believe Texas Medicaid as well, you need to have a policy and procedure manual. So that can seem really daunting. There's a lot of AI and stuff now you can use to draft it, but please go in and review it and make sure that number one, it's compliant with HR policy. Number two, it's compliant with employee labor laws and things of that nature, because your RBTs are required to be employees. IRS tax laws, we can't do anything about that. But you have to have certain things in there for your employees, but then your BCBA might be a contractor. You're going to have separate things for those two buckets of staff members. Your policy and procedure manual has to have some checks and balances in place to make sure it's compliant with all the legalities of running your own business, right? So within that policy and procedure manual, and again, if you go to the Provider Express website for Optum, they're going to give you everything that they want in there. So they're extremely specific things like having a fire escape plan. Is the building that, let's say you have a physical center, is the building ADA accessible? Does it have a wheelchair ramp? So it gets really specific and very detailed. And if you can pass an Optum or Medicaid audit, you can pass the others. So again, have your policies and procedures. They're going to ask you things like, how do you ensure if there's a disagreement or feedback from the family? How do you handle that? What's your process? Who are they going to contact? And you have to turn in that policy and procedure manual, and they have to be able to identify what that procedure is, that it's laid out and clear. They're going to ask you things like your quality control standards. They're going to ask you, oh my gosh, it's so much. If you print it, it's a booklet. There's so many things that Optum asks for. That's why I'm saying if you can pass an Optum audit, you can pass any other credentialing audit. They're going to ask about RBT supervision, how you do your assessments. They're going to ask about every single thing. And this is also a good exercise for a startup because it's forcing you to make your policies and procedures, and it's forcing you to systematize what it is that you're trying to do. So if nothing else, going through these audits is going to help you create your business, like really formalize your business. Derek, did you put your hand up?
Yeah, I want to post a link for Optum here. I'm looking at Provider Administrative Manual. It says Optum Care of Ohio.
If you go to Optum Provider Express,
okay,
there should be a provider audit tool. There should be two types, the medical records and the like overall company audit tool.
Audit Preparation Provider Express. I'll share that in the chat. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. On there, you're probably going to see like staff training and compliance. How are you training your RBTs? How are you providing supervision? And then you can use that to make your mock audit internally, and you can use that for quality standards as well. Were you able to find it? I know it's a downloadable PDF, but like you said, a link would be good.
Yeah, it's not. It's just going right to the download. I'll just drop the file in the. Let me share it in the chat. But if not, I can post. I'll post a link for it in the comments on the video.
Okay. And when you're conducting those mock audits, even if you're a solopreneur, right? Like you're just trying to get your policies and procedures in place, use that audit tool to jog your own mind on how you're going to resolve some of the issues that'll come up. So for example, I don't have a policy on, trying to think off the top of my head, all of the different policies that they require. I don't have a policy on going over the behavior plan with the parents. So that's going to make you sit down and flush everything out. So it's just a good exercise as an entrepreneur. Okay, you found an Optum audit tool. Thank you. So You went through the audit, you're setting up for success, it's in review, and the reviews can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 60, 90 days. It really depends on, number one, the provider, number two, their process. I know COVID slowed everything down, and I think people are just blaming it on COVID at this point because we're in 2024 and they're still slowed down, especially here in Florida. So stay informed of the different changes that are constantly coming out. So I've been billing insurance since, not me personally billing insurance, but a provider that someone is billing me out since 2007 as a therapist, and then like getting the different certifications. And I can't tell you how many times insurance has changed. They have changed what they will pay for, the settings that they will pay for, if they'll pay concurrently, and by that paying out the time for the RBT, as well as paying out the time for the BCBA supervising them. To give you an example of Optum, sticking with Optum, they used to not pay concurrently. If you build out the RBT and the BCBA at the same time, you would get the claims kicked back because you can't bill two providers at once. Then they changed that, and now you are able to bill concurrently. So that's something to keep in mind. Those things change. A recent change was TRICARE. And recent, I mean in the last couple of years. They put out a policy in their manual saying that if you don't conduct, don't quote me on this, but I think it's a minimum of 1 parent training per month within the 6-month authorization, they will recoup, I want to say, about 20% of the claims that they have paid out. So that is something that is obviously very impactful to your business if you're billing TRICARE. So make sure you're staying informed, and you're always going to get the email blasts and things like that. And I know we all get a lot of emails, but please read them because those things are sent out in those kind of memos and bulletins and things like that. TRICARE specifically tends to have webinars. I know Blue Cross and Anthem tend to do more of the email, but TRICARE tends to have webinars. I know we're all really busy, but take the time to attend them because they are going to break everything down for you. I'm dating myself here, but when they moved to an electronic portal, because we used to have fax everything in, all the graphs, everything used to be faxed in. Then they created the portal where you upload your PDFs that you extract from your system. That was a webinar, and all of us were huddled around the operations person trying to figure out what this new process was, right? And we had to train all the BCBAs, but that came from a TRICARE webinar. So they do provide you those free trainings of what they want from you as a clinician. Is it going to answer every question? No, you're probably still going to have some growing pains, but overall, it's a pretty good understanding of what they want. Building and maintaining relationships. I cannot stress enough to make friends at the insurance company. If you call and you find a rep, you really get their extension, get their name, try to deal with them directly. Sometimes the insurance will assign a rep to you through your credentialing process. Once you're credentialed, they may assign a rep based on the client. Get to know the person, get a good relationship. There's a little bit of, let's say, subjectivity in how people operate in insurances. So the policy is the same, the manual is what it is, but it really comes down to the rep and what they're willing to approve, what they're willing to interpret the way you intended, because some people are very literal and other people will understand what you're trying to say in your policy and procedure, right? So make friends, get to know how people communicate, get to know how they want to see things written, what they want said, so that you can get things approved. And please be truthful when you do that. And then know when to get help. So I am just dealing with a client now in Arizona. She tried to do credentialing on her own. There's a very specific way to do it. So essentially you have to submit an application for each provider and the group, and then get the group approved and then add all the providers to the group. It's a very complex process. She tried doing it herself. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. So she can't bill out Medicaid. She has this wait list. It's just being like a big barrier for her to be able to generate revenue and start serving her clients. So she reached out for assistance with credentialing because she knew this was a very large pain point, but she still has this business to run because there are other insurances that they are credentialed with. So know when to get help, know your limits. It's fine to DIY. I DIY myself, but know when you're DIYing is like hitting a wall and you essentially need to find someone to guide you through or maybe even take over for you. I work very closely with a credentialer. She does everything from start to finish. She sets you up with Asana and starts putting in comments like, I called Aetna, I called Cigna, I am negotiating rates with this credentialer. So know when to get help, know when to reach out, because we all have our strengths and weaknesses, right? And I definitely need support in this department. So let's say you get your provider number. You're credentialed, you have that provider number, you start billing, everything's beautiful. Make sure you have ongoing compliance with that provider. So go in, review your handbook regularly. They're going to put out those webinars. They're going to send those email blasts. They're going to give you their updates saying, we were doing this, now we're doing it this other way. Go in, take that information that the credentialer is giving you, or excuse me, that the insurance provider is giving you, and put that into your handbook as soon as it comes out. Put that, watch your webinars, look at everything, extract the information, look at the changes, and build it into your handbook and build it into your processes. Something like, I want to say around 2020, 2021, Florida Medicaid required the use of the Vineland and the BASC 3 for every initial and reevaluation assessment. So that was something that, because Florida Medicaid required it, we just made it a standard for all insurances. Number one, it gives you more information as the clinician to be able to select goals and see the client's strengths and weaknesses, but also it makes the system easier because it's standardized. If you are a clinician, you don't have to keep track of, okay, this client is Medicaid, so they need a Vineland and a BASC. This client is TRICARE, so they need a PDDBI. You're just doing everything for everyone, which has its pros and its cons, right? So something to keep in mind, if you're a small business, you could probably pick and choose what you're doing, but once you get larger and you start scaling, you may want to standardize that process. And then there's a process of recredentialing. I want to say Medicaid is every 5 years, at least here in Florida. It does vary by state. And TRICARE, I want to say, is every 3 years. I'm not sure. I'm like definitely not an expert in credentialing. Just kind of trial and error has taught me a lot of things. So get ready for that recredentialing. And with that might come an audit. So that's why I'm saying update your handbook as soon as things change. Update your processes. Start looking at your assessments, make sure that they're meeting those new standards that come out every year. I feel like they change things because number one, that's going to prevent your claims from getting kicked back. And number two, when it comes time for a recredentialing, you don't have to go back and make all these changes. They're already done. You can just submit that PDF or give it a once over and make sure that everything is matching up. You also want to maintain a system. Let's talk about maintenance here. You want to maintain a system. So you want to have those tailored checklists. If you are doing specifics to credentialers instead of just standardizing, make sure you're giving your clinicians, or if you're the clinician, make sure you have those checklists to make sure you're staying in compliance. Having those network profiles is what we were talking about, right? Like certain things for Medicaid, certain things for TRICARE and Optum and so on and so forth. Regular policy reviews, like I said, watch your webinars, look at things, go back in and change your systems. Training on network specifics. So if you have an in-house biller, if you're billing yourself, make sure you know those specifics. For example, Optum, you can bill concurrently. I don't believe you can with TRICARE. Some insurance companies allow you to do parent training via telehealth, others do not. So you really need to know the specifics when you're submitting your billing and when you're submitting for credentialing. Create a centralized tracking system. That could be Google Drive, that could be a Word document, but have one place where you're putting where you're at with your credentialing process, when your recredentialing is due, and you have all of your things stored. So your policies and procedures and everything, you want one location where you can go in and cross-reference everything when the insurance providers start trickling out those changes. And unfortunately, they don't happen all at once. In the process of your credentialing or re-credentialing, or when you start billing and you're looking at claims, you definitely want to look at status updates. Even if it's just you, it's a lot easier to write things down and say, okay, this claim was denied because we're not allowed to bill in schools. Now you know that, and you can look at your systems and look how things are doing and adjust. And make those data-driven decisions. Some people decide not to continue to work with an insurance provider for whatever reason, whether it's because there's not a large need in their area, their rates are too low, they're asking too much as far as paperwork, and that's really up to you, but you need that data to make that decision. And then take a look at access control. If you're going to have that on a Google Drive, let's say, make sure we're not sharing that with anybody and everybody. That is a lot of your, number one, personal information. If you're the clinician, I believe like your MPI, all your BCBA number, everything is on there. And if you're not the clinician, it's your business information. So make sure that you have some type of access control on who could go in and see those things. And then I made this checklist. Let me see if it opens up. Can you guys just confirm that you're seeing a Google Doc now and not a Google slide?
Yep, I see it.
Okay, so this is just a quick checklist that we went through: preparation, gathering your documents, application submission, your source verification. If there's a committee review, sometimes there is for different providers. There's a little bit here on contract negotiation. This is definitely a refined skill set, not my expertise. But when you're looking at negotiation, that could happen right at the very beginning of credentialing. For example, Aetna's rates are very low, and I believe Cigna's are as well. So you might get the contract, you're really excited, you got your provider number, they tell you you can start billing, and you see the rates, and you're like, I can't even pay an RBT with what they're paying out. So you might need to jump in and start your negotiation before you submit your first claim. So keep that in mind. If you want to look at rate negotiation down the road, let's say like a year into billing them, compile those statistics. What are the client outcomes? What is your average rate of behavior reduction, of skill acquisition? How many clients have you served? How wide are you casting your net? Are you in multiple counties? If you're in a very large county, what's the radius you're serving, right? So have those data so that you can compile something and then present that in your rate negotiation. Here we have a little bit about provider directories. We talked about training on billing and then ongoing compliance. So it's just a quick checklist, and I can provide this to you guys for you to post. Again, it's going to be editable, so you can go in and make specifics for your Medicaid, for Blue Cross, and things of that nature. But yeah, that is pretty much all I had for you guys.
Well, you guys that are here watching, definitely post your questions in the chat. But I had a couple, just trying to understand a little bit better the whole NPI structure and how all that works. When you're setting up initially, you need to have an NPI number for the provider. So that's the individual NPI number. And then, but you have to have that already in place to set up the organizational NPI number, right?
Yes. For example, if I'm going to start my own ABA company, I'm a clinician. For other companies that have billed me out, I need my BCBA number and I need my NPI number. You already have that if you're a practicing clinician. If I want to go create my own ABA company, I have to apply for a group NPI number, which is a really quick application to say, okay, Didiana de la Osa has her NPI number. Now Premier Behavioral Health Consulting has an NPI number. And I'm going to add Didiana de la Osa to the roster under Premier Behavioral Health Consulting. And the credentialing is usually going to happen at that group NPI level. There are some exceptions like Arizona Medicaid that needs, I want to say TRICARE is like that as well. So you usually need both.
If you have a location and you're going to, like, in the same county and you open a second location, does that physical location also need to be have an NPI number separate, be credentialed separately, or?
Not a separate MPI, but a different credentialing number depending on the insurance.
Okay.
So everything really depends on the insurance. For example, Florida Medicaid, yes, different counties, you need a different MPI number. For other insurances, your corporate office serves as your credentialing site, and then you can operate in different centers.
All right. And then the married name, maiden names thing. And this happens a lot. When somebody's in the process of going through this whole application process, and they get married, should they just keep their maiden name on everything until they get through the process and then go back and update it with their married name? Or is it better to update it as soon as possible? What do you recommend there, if you have a recommendation?
I can't recommend changing versus not changing names. I can tell you what I did. I never changed my last name because think about, you have to change your BCBA certification. So you have to pay for that. You have to change your license, your passport if you have one, your social security card, all your bank accounts, right? So that was a whole load of paperwork that I wasn't willing to do. But for the people that are willing to do it as soon as possible, do it before you start doing your background checks, do it before you start creating your entities and things of that nature, so everything is under the same name, is just going to flow a lot easier if you have all the paperwork under the same name.
Awesome. And then for clarity with this Optum policy and procedure template they have, so your recommendation or your suggestion is to use that because it's the most robust version. Use that, develop out your policies, and then use those policies for the other insurances because it'll be cross-platform that way. And then, so those policies getting into internal policies. So those policies, once they're developed, and I notice it, the Optum policy and procedure template, they don't even get through on the middle of the second page, they start talking about HIPAA compliance, right? And one of the things that is missing a lot from most of the ABA centers that we come in and start working with on the compliance side and the technical stuff, they don't have a WISP, and which is their written information security program. So that's just a collection of a bunch of policies and how you're going to handle things. So this is the clinical side for insurance. You also need to make sure that you have your technical side and all your stuff for compliance in order for if you're going to be BHCOE or CASP accredited, and making sure that you're HIPAA compliant the whole time. So that's probably a good time when you do all that to put together how you're going to manage your technical HIPAA compliance also. So that Optum audit tool is in the chat. Make sure you guys grab that link and download that. And then the ongoing compliance, could you talk a little bit more about what the insurance companies are expecting as far as frequency of compliance updating? I suggest using Monday or Trello or something like that for your project management for your compliance. You could have all your different insurance credentials listed out there, start date, end date, what needs to happen at different phases. But how often are they going to expect you to go in and update your training and your compliance?
So it depends how often they're going to audit you. Some audit as quickly as within a year, some audit before you're recredentialing, which could be 3 or 5 years down the line. But the thing with insurance companies is they'll take a while to audit you, but then they're going to go all the way back to the very beginning. So you want to make sure you have everything in place from the jump as a startup, or if you're a scale up, making sure you're getting everything compliant, because when you are audited, you are going to be audited all the way back to day one, and you may have to pay back funds paid out to you if things are not in line.
Yeah, we don't have to, all the trouble we go through to do the work and then get paid for it, you don't have to pay anything back after all that's said and done, for sure. All right, one of our viewers has a question. Insurance credentialing best practice, wants to know, do you mind explaining CAQH? I'm registered through the company I currently work for, but should I create my own to assist with credentialing?
This is a question that comes up a lot, and a lot of employers make it seem that they own the CAQH, but the clinician actually owns the CAQH. A lot of employers will tell you, oh, I'll create a login and I'll take care of it for you, and that's totally fine. But you should still have your login information, because if you were to leave that employer or whatever the case may be, that is your information. So CAQH is where you're saying, where you're practicing, the clientele you're willing to work with, like individuals with autism, children, teens, adults. So it's also serving as a referral source. You can say, do you want clients referred to you? So Cigna, now it's Evernorth, will start sending you emails saying, hey, I have a 4-year-old in your area, in your zip code. Do you have availability to start seeing them? So that also starts creating your waitlist pipeline if you're trying to do a startup. I do have my own login. Oh, you're asking the person. Yes. So
Yeah, I was
make sure
just
you
wondering if they
have
had their
your
own login.
Yeah, make sure you have your own login. And if your employer did it for you, make sure they're giving you access to that, because that is your information and that goes with you no matter who you work for. Your employer doesn't own that.
Any idea what the process would be if like somebody left somewhere and they had to go back and reset it and it's set up under their work email or something like that? Or see.
Yeah, that's a nightmare. I've definitely seen that. So before you leave an organization, I would definitely try to get that information. You could always call CAQH and explain the situation, because ultimately it is your information and you should have access to it. I'm sure they're going to ask you for very specific things like your social and your birthday and things like that to verify that it's you, but you should have access to that, because that's what any employer is going to use to add you to their roster. That is required for credentialing. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because that wasn't included. Because I was thinking more of the startup, not so much like people adding to their roster. But that's a good point.
Yeah, and I guess they do have their login, so that's good.
Yeah, it's fine if your employer has access to your stuff and does the attestations for you that we have to do. I want to say it's every 120 days, but you should always have access.
All right, so give us one pitfall to avoid during this whole credentialing process that is the absolute no-no. Oh, and we have one more software man. Yeah, so I want to know one no-no. Just avoid this. Don't ever do this when you're credentialing. Go.
Don't fake information. Don't fake BCBAs. Don't, obviously, that's a given. So big no-nos, other than blatantly lying on your application, I would say don't turn things in incomplete, because it's only going to delay your process. It's going to open you for a denial, and then you have to reapply and start the process all over again. And especially with Medicaids across different states, you're looking at 60 to 90 days. So if you get denied, double that, triple that if you have another issue with a deficiency in the application.
All right, and then Tatiana had a question about which software management systems you recommend. I don't know, Tatiana, are you talking about the practice management systems or?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Because project management wise, there's a lot of things that you put in the chat, right? Like Asana, Trello, Monday.
Yeah, Trello.
Practice management.
Management. Yep.
Practice management. I think it depends what you want. Do you want an all-in-one practice management that you can build directly from there? Then you're probably looking at the bigger things like Central Reach, Rethink, things of that nature. If you want something that's maybe a cheaper option, because Central Reach can get very pricey, there are things like Aloha and Motivity, where Motivity is where your RBTs and BCBAs collect their data. It's the clinical side. Aloha is your kind of like billing practice management side. I think ultimately it's whatever you're most comfortable with, and frankly, what's within your budget. You can figure it out in-house with pretty much any practice management software. It really comes down to your budget and how like your brain works, right? Do you want to compartmentalize things into admin and clinical? Do you want it all together?
Yeah, trials and demos on those things, Tatiana. Like you said, it depends on how your brain works. You want the thing that works properly for you. And you also want to be thinking about, okay, am I going to be a solo practitioner, or am I going to have 2 or 3 people? And how am I going to be handling my billing and my finances and stuff like that? But think about a year down the road where you're going to be, because what you don't want to do is be in the middle of scaling and getting your location set up or hiring BCBAs and RBTs, and then this system is not going to be scalable for us. And then now you're in the middle of all the other things you have to do anyway, and you're moving practice management systems. So like we've gone through a couple of those where we've moved from one system to another. Usually these companies will just go in and move it for you and do it all, but there's still a ton of stress on your internal team and your administrative team getting all that information moved over. There are always glitches no matter what. You might hear my 4-year-old yelling in the background there, but you're like, make sure you're thinking it through down the road too, so that you're not moving solutions from one thing to the other if you can avoid it at all. But again, it comes down to what you can afford, what you can fit in the budget. And yeah, the killer combination I've seen for the startups for affordability has been, like you mentioned, Aloha, ABA, and Motivity. And then once they start getting bigger and everybody's got iPads and running around town or running around the center, usually they end up on, Central Reach or a Rethink solution there. So
yeah, I've used all of them. They look very different, but they all do the same thing, right? So you're not going to be, there's no secret sauce, no magic weapon that one has that's going to make you scale faster or launch faster. Some of them are a little bit more organized, some of them are a little bit more streamlined, but with that comes cost. And if you're not able to pay for it, that's fine. Just pick something else. And as you're scaling, keep in mind, okay, eventually I do want to move to Central Reach. So I'm going to start thinking about that now that I have 5 clients, not when you have 180 clients.
Don't think anything is, like you said, there's none of them is a secret weapon. Everybody knows about all of them. Everybody has their own opinions on stuff. And there's still no magic key to implementing something like that either. Even if you get the white glove implementation service, we're going to come in, we're going to set everything up for you. Make sure that you're managing your own expectations when you're taking that project on, because it is never simple. It is always a huge project. Standing up a new system or moving from one system to another is always a major project. Make sure you put a lot of thought into it, trial them, demo them, have multiple conversations with the reps from any company that you're considering, ask a lot of questions, and use them as a resource. We deal a lot with Central Reach, Rethink, Aloha, ABA. They're always, and Motivity too, they're all always happy to help you and discuss these things before you go into that transition. So take your time, Tatiana.
And to your point, the HIPAA compliance and the integrity of, like, when you're transferring data and all of those things, whose hands it goes into, who you're sharing that with, that's also something that's really important from the beginning, because HIPAA is a federal law, right? You could be looking at a $250,000 fine and jail time for messing up HIPAA. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, we had an ABA. It's a kind of a horror story, but they had a business email compromise. The FBI is in the middle of an investigation. They're being investigated now. It's not a good situation.
Jeez.
Are trying to help them through their incident response and stuff. But one of the big things was they were in the middle of a migration from Rethink to Central Reach, managing it themselves, doing everything on their own, kind of trying to figure things out as they go because of budget concerns. And when the owner's personal computer got hacked, she had a list of everyone's Central Reach credentials in a Word document on her computer, and it got stolen by the hackers, and they went right in and helped themselves to all the PHI. Yeah, make sure that you're going through that whole process and that understanding that you are responsible for your data no matter what, and that you're setting it up properly and that you're supervising that very closely, because the white glove services are great for the standing up and having plenty of consulting time with setting up the new PMS, but it is still a project. Don't give it the time that it's due and the energy that it's due. So.
And that's with anything in business, right? If you're going to be a business owner, you have to know what's going on, and you have to properly vet whomever you're allowing into your business, right?
And I'm glad you mentioned it. It's okay to ask for help. We get business owners, we get out on our own. I'm doing this myself. I can do it better than my old boss did. So you break out on your own. It's this natural, the caterpillar to butterfly. You have this metamorphosis and you're blooming out. And you have this idea that I'm going to do everything myself. I went through this 15 years ago, but I'm going to do everything myself. It's okay to ask for help. I'm not an expert in finance or accounting. I'm not an expert in insurance. I'm not an expert in law. I'm not an expert. Grab people that you can work with, that you can get advice from, have mentors in these areas or vendors in these areas, or at least some kind of advisors, and use this group. There are a lot of resources in this group that are free and tap into that. So, and with that, I'd also like to say thank you, Dee, for coming on here and doing this talk. I think
Of course.
it's helpful for the people that are watching now, and also for everybody that's going to view it in the future. So that's really amazing. Thank you for your time and your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
You're already doing the work, investing your time, your energy, and your vision. So let's make it count. Build something that works without breaking you. The EBCBA Blueprint is the way. Get started for free with our foundation course.